Thank you all for coming to our end of the semester faculty and staff meeting. And I need to say it's the end of a semester like no other. Everyone has contributed extra effort, everyone has sacrificed, and our students are the beneficiaries of a highly functioning unit that advances their pathways to the creative industries. Thank you again. At our street address, you can find our 1,300 students, 120 plus faculty, 25 professional staff specialists, and alumni on the same street corner. We're all located at the intersection of arts, technology, and commerce. Our new chancellor, Dr. Michelle Marks, is an innovator and visionary in higher education. One of the immediate benefits she has provided is connecting CU Denver with an impressive network of leaders in public and private partnerships. We are grateful that she is making time in her schedule today to moderate a fireside chat after our guest's keynote. Public and private partnerships, or P3, assures that CU Denver has dynamic and essential connectivity with both public and private spheres. Dr. Marks has the business acumen of an experienced senior administrator, as well as the spirit of an academic. She's known for developing innovative programs that help students succeed, attract new student populations, facilitate research opportunities, and drive up new revenue growth. Because of her ability to make essential connections, CU Denver deans were invited to an invitation-only conference of national leaders in P3 and innovation. It was at one of those conference sessions that I heard a presentation by Dr. Farouk Dey of Johns Hopkins University. In his inaugural role as Vice Provost for Integrative Learning and Life Design at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Dey leads programs and services that bridge curricular and experiential learning with life aspirations for students and alumni across the university's schools and divisions. In his former role as Dean of the Career and Experiential Education at Stanford University, he successfully built and scaled career and experiential learning by creating a vision of meaningful work and a networked approach of personalized connections and inclusive communities. He's now working with education and industry leaders at Johns Hopkins to launch a new vision of equitable access to life purpose for all students, regardless of background or social capital, using principles of integrative learning and life design. So, as you hear his keynote address, please feel free to formulate questions and place them in the Zoom chat function. Alice Krogan will relay those to Chancellor Marks, who will serve as the moderator for the fireside chat portion of today's program around 12:30. Colleagues and friends, allow me to present our guest speaker, Dr. Farouk Dey.
Thank you so much, Larry, and thank you, Michelle, and thank you all so much for the invitation. I'm honored to be in your presence today and to have the opportunity to share some of the insights that I have gathered during my years at Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and now at Johns Hopkins University. And what I can add to a very generous introduction is that equity and equitable access has been a theme of all of my work at all of these universities, and an area of passion for me, and hopefully you will be able to see it today. The title of my conversation, or my keynotes today, is Reimagine You, and you is subject to interpretation. So it can be you as in yourself, or it could be you as in university, or however you choose to interpret it. But the point here is that this entire keynote is built on the basic principle that we're not looking for trails that have already been blazed. We are looking to blaze new trails, and that is true for us as organizations of higher education, but it is also true for the students who we are here to support and to help, that they are in the process of blazing their own trails. I'd like to start this keynote by sharing with you the story of Nina Mufli, who was a student at one of the universities in California and was frustrated after the economic downturn of 2008 that lingered all the way to 2010 and beyond. Um, she was frustrated with the job search market, just could not find an opportunity, was sending her portfolio and resume all over the country. She had a list of companies she wanted to work for, but also others that she was willing to try out, and was having the similar experience that many had at that time and continue to have today, which is that your hard work just sort of gets lost in cyberspace after you push that application button. So Nina did what probably none of us imagined she would do. She just took things in her own hand, and she made a short list of companies that she was dying to work for. And at the top of that list was Airbnb. And she just went on and created a website, and she called it Nina for Airbnb, gave it a hashtag, and basically turned her entire resume into an open love letter to Airbnb. But beyond a love letter, she shared a lot about herself, as you can see here on the screen. But also, she shared about uh, what she could do for Airbnb. So first, she introduced Airbnb and how it was a growing company. And I remind you that this was around 2013. So Airbnb was not the company it is today. And she immediately spotted the opportunities at that time that Airbnb can expand into. So she found that Airbnb did not exist in the Middle East, and decided to do a full case analysis, a full study for what Airbnb could do to grow in the Middle East. And she put that all of that online, a study of all of the cultures of the countries and the geopolitical climate. She talked about why this matters, gave a full explanation of the Bedouin hospitality, of how the Middle East is becoming the millennial melting pot, how it's attracting tourism, essentially showing what the opportunities are for a company like Airbnb. And she created a full proposal of where to start. What could Airbnb do to begin that? So this was a full business proposal with recommendations for partnership opportunities, with key regional events in the near future. I don't think she could predict that we will be in a global pandemic in 2020, but she knew that there will be a World Cup in 2022 and a Dubai Expo in 2020. And she tied it back to why she loves Airbnb, that she has a personal connection with this company, and that's why she wanted to work for it. In addition to this, she wanted to create a narrative for why she belongs at Airbnb, and shared the stories there, and where she could belong. And she gave some options. I could work for in marketing, in operations, in business development. Heck, I'll even fetch coffee, breaking the assumption that millennials and Gen Z are not willing to pay their dues. She was willing to do anything. And what has happened at that time is that within a week's matter, her hashtag went viral on Twitter and in other social media. And lots of people took notice. And she started doing interviews with MSNBC and CNBC and local channels and radio stations. And lots of corporate CEOs and hiring executives took notice. And she, within, I think her website just had over 250,000 views just within that first week. Um, and she ended up getting over a couple of dozen interviews from key companies, including Airbnb. And her interviews were not only with hiring executives, but also with CEOs of companies. It would have been a great story if I just told you now that Airbnb ended up hiring her. I did meet her eventually, and she told me that they continued the conversation with her and told her that they really loved her, but that they couldn't see a fit. But what came out of that process was multiple offers from other companies, and she ended up, as she explained to me, actually landing exactly where she needed to be in a role that she loved for a company that she really liked. So this was and by the way, I reached out to her when I saw this story. We grabbed coffee at the time. I was at Stanford, and she was in the Bay Area. And I asked her what made her do this, and she said it was it was a moment of desperation. She had nothing to lose, and she tried everything else. She tried the resources on her college campus. They didn't sound too different from the resources I had or other college campuses had. And she expressed frustration with that because it was too linear of a process and it did not really connect with what she really wanted to do. And we're showing her very traditional methods of how to look for opportunities. And eventually, she just decided to trust her creativity. She was a very creative person, and she said, I'm just going to put this out there and see what happens. And I even tried to encourage her, told her that she could now write a book about this experience. She can go on a speaking circuit. And what I learned about Nina is that she's a very shy person, and she was overwhelmed by the attention that she had during that 15 minutes of fame, and wanted to just go back into her cocoon, and reminded me really quickly, I just needed a job. I don't need anything else. Um, I start this with this story because we live in a world of Ninas today. When you combine millennials, Gen Zs, and post Gen Zs, they make already half of the population in the United States, and they are already taking over the workplace. We also know that these generations are what we call digital natives. They connect and make meaning and network mostly digitally. It is the new age of thinking, of doing, of working, and of connecting, and they do this extremely well. And evidence here with Nina is that she was able to lean on this new way of thinking, doing, working, and connecting very quickly. She pivoted to that and created something pretty fantastic that ended up producing results for her. We also know with this generation is that it is a generation that's in debt, and the college debt amounts continue to rise year to year to astronomical numbers. Many of them are back in the nest, not just because of COVID-19, but because of affordability. And uh, and after graduation, they struggle to find opportunities just like Nina did. 14% are still seeking opportunities within 6 months after graduation. 19% are finding themselves in low skilled jobs that pay on average $24,000 a year. And a quarter, 25% are in support jobs that pay $37,000 a year. Certainly really tough metrics to think of when they feel that they have paid all of that money up front for their college tuition. Um, all of this gives us a whole setup for why the traditional career development theories that have been used by college campuses, which are mostly structural and developmental, may no longer work with this generation. These theories are based on the principles of matching, that you can take a human being and study their traits and analyze their personality and their preferences, and then match them with job traits. It's a very linear process that has been used for the last several decades since the Industrial Revolution. But we are in a new era where these things don't work anymore. Instead, what I am recommending in my talks on the road is to take a different approach, to recognize that career planning as a method is out. And I'll pause here for a second and just ask you to answer to yourself how many of you are pursuing a career today that you had planned on when you were 18. And if we were in a full room, I probably would get some laughter and giggle, and probably a couple of hands will go up. That's usually what I get but for the vast majority, that is not our story. We did not plan to be academics or faculty or vice provosts or chancellors or whatever our roles are, creative artists. We might have had the curiosity about those things, but planning as a method that was used before no longer works. What works today is to identify an area of curiosity. What are you curious about? This is what I ask students all the time: is what has inspired you lately? What are you curious about? and then to engage in immersive experiences that help us peel the layers around that area of curiosity and build connections, meaningful connections around us that help open doors for us to experiment even further and bring more opportunities our way. So to do this, we have to replace the concepts of career and life goals with concepts of curiosity and inspiration, and to replace the plans with prototyping and experimentation. And this is what happens to be the concept of life design, which is based on design thinking principles. Many of you are must be familiar with this, but it's essentially, instead of designing using design thinking to design a product, the product is ourselves. We are designing our own lives, and it starts by a process of empathy and recognizing our own areas of curiosity, defining what those areas are about and what are the challenges that we are really curious and interested in exploring further, and then generating several ideas, choosing one, and then creating a prototype. And that prototype can be anything. It can be starting a startup, a new organization, doing an internship, taking a class, essentially launching a project where there is a great amount of uncertainty on the other end, and being comfortable with that uncertainty. We are asking, through life design, we are asking students to take risks. And by taking risks, that means that there is a risk for failure. There are challenges, and there are life circumstances that get in the way. And this is why I like to wrap this concept of life design with consequential connections and immersive experiences. That in order to truly take those risks, you have to have the opportunity to engage in immersive experiences, but also to have connections with mentors and people who can guide you along the way and help you avoid some of the pitfalls that are not necessary at this point. These concepts are very important because they help bridge the gap between the haves and have-nots. It is easier to ask someone with more privilege to take risks. It is harder to ask someone who has lots of life circumstances that add challenges that for them to take risks. And that could be related to their own economic situation. It could be connected to their own gender, to their own race. They could have children at home. There are lots of situations that can get in the way, and building a network around the person so that they have a safety net as they take these risks is important. These are important concepts because we are also at a moment where we're starting to notice there's a major shift in the labor markets. It is hard to have someone like Nina predict what career she will pursue and what job she will have in the next 5 years, and to plan it when we don't know exactly what jobs will disappear in the next 5 years and what jobs will be created. And this is why precisely life design is appropriate, because it is not about based on the principles of planning, of predicting what one will become and creating a straight line. It is the idea of experimentation and construction of that career and that life as you go. We are already predicting job displacement by automation at great rates around the world, as you can see. And we know, based on the most recent World Economic Forum, that 50% of workers of the future will need reskilling by 2025 because of the massive changes that are happening, or the paradigm shifts that are happening now in the world of work. The World Economic Forum already predicted the top 10 skills by 2025. And these are similar skills that we have seen in past reports, except one category, and it is self-management. It's the one in the green bubbles on your screen. They're active learning and learning strategies, leadership and social influence, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. These are skills that are about how the person manages their own career and their own work and their own brand and their own self. So it means in how they create content, how they use the opportunity to be a social media influencer, for example, how they can become thought leaders and scholars, how they can behave with teams in order to manage their career forward. The other noticeable thing here is that the previous reports of the World Economic Forum used to be for predictions for the future, like for about 10 years or the next 20 years. And because of the pandemic, everything has shortened all of a sudden, and many of these projections have been revised because the trends that we were predicting in the world of work are accelerating at a great rate right now because of COVID-19. Which has been a global tragedy. And I want to just pause for a second here and just acknowledge that as we talk about the economic impact and talking about the privilege of designing one's life in the future, that we are in the midst of one of the worst crises in the world in the United States. 70 million, almost 70 million people have already been infected by COVID-19. Over 1.5 million deaths as a result of that. And in the United States, we're already approaching 300,000 deaths. And that alone is tragic. And to add to that, there is an economic impact that is not felt to its depth just yet. There are parts of our society and economy that are feeling it deeply. A very good friend of mine is a restaurant owner, was on the phone with me yesterday, and I could tell you that there is a category of workers who are really suffering right now as a result of the deep economic impact, as you can see from the retractions in the GDP worldwide. Here in the United States, projections of GDP retractions resemble the ones we've experienced in past economic recessions of the 1940s and the 30s. I don't think the impact has caught up with us just yet. That I feel like many of us who are still able to work on Zoom might just observe from afar, but the projections are not looking really good. Just take a look at the rising unemployment that we have experienced as a result of COVID-19. And when you compare those claims to the ones from the last recession we experienced in 2008, or even the one previous to that, the numbers are not even comparable. We already know, thanks to some of the studies, that 60% of restaurants are permanently closed. Shopping, almost half of the shopping and retail is permanently closed, and this is affecting essentially all of the service industries like beauties and spas, bars and nightlife and fitness. But at the same time, this massive paradigm shift that we're experiencing, we must remember that we've gone through this before through past industrial revolutions. And in fact, the World Economic Report predicts that we will lose 85 million jobs by 2025, but we will gain 97 million jobs by 2025 also, which is the same story that we've experienced when we went from the steam engine to mass production revolution and so forth. The economic downturns tend to be incubators of new companies and new organizations. This tends to be the moment when people are most creative. You look at the most recent economic recession, that was the birth of WhatsApp and Instagram and Venmo and Slack and Nest and Pinterest and Cloudera, and I could list a lot more companies that were early startups there's a couple of early years that have become giants today. And I predict that we will see the same thing over the next 10 years, that there are right now lots of entrepreneurs who are thinking about new ideas in this new economic revolution that we're experiencing. And this tends to be the time when investors also are most eager to open their pocketbook and to take some risks. So this will happen. And what I tell people is just pay attention to the world around you and what has happened over the last 8 months. Most of us are working online all the time, close to 100%, if not 100%. I at home now, I'm doing this presentation for you, and I have 3 children who are going through school online and doing their homework fully. We're receiving much more delivery packages than ever in the past. I've had a couple of doctor appointments completely online in the last few months. We're watching more Netflix and Hulu, and I just added Disney Plus to our package. We're moving more and more towards a recognition of renewable energy and its role in the society. So many of the industries that are around us are looking for new ways to reach customers. What this all means is that it's opportunities for lots of companies and startups and organizations to do business differently, which means that it's new opportunities for your students to work differently. Therefore, we can't plan for them or with them for a certain job, but we can help them design the life and the career that they wish to have based on those principles. The early trends that we are already seeing from COVID-19 already tell us that there is a big need for building community. We're all craving it, and it's really hard to build community on Zoom. We need to find a way. And I'm willing to bet that there are probably a couple of startups that are looking into this right now. And I think the technology that figures this out will do this pretty well. Remote work, I think, is here to stay even post pandemic. There'll be some going back, but I think many organizations, including universities, are already deciding that some jobs don't need to come back to campus. They can continue to be online. Online learning is normal. Will be normalized in the future and will be preferred. It might not feel like it today because students and teachers haven't found their rhythm yet and are not using the full ecosystem of educational technology just yet. But I think we can all agree that they're getting better at it. My kids are getting better at it. Their teachers are getting better at it. And our faculty in our universities are getting more comfortable and better at it. And I think with more time, we will find ourselves in a more of a hybrid approach, and perhaps in some universities, and schools, fully embracing online learning. Value will be measured by outcomes rather than input. Value is scaled through content and connections rather than through individual services and transactions. Connections are democratized, and this will be a core key of how we will provide value to all, regardless of access to social capital. Skills are measured and credentialed, and that will be a major shift in higher education, that it is about measuring and credentialing skills and finding a way for skills to have a prominent spot in the transcript and academic credits. We already know that jobs will disappear, but new jobs will be born, and automation will take over, and higher education is finally at a tipping point. And you look at the impact of COVID-19 on higher education today, I don't know of a university that has not been touched by this. We already know that at least 7 universities have permanently, or colleges have permanently closed, and many are shifting the way that they are doing business. And I don't think there will be a return to normal. Why? That because it's directly connected to enrollment. If students do not choose to come to our universities anymore because we don't do online learning anymore very well, or because value, they can't put value on the dollars that they are paying, they will choose different types of colleges. And you could see this by just the early deposits this year versus last year in enrollment management. And there's a big difference. We will have to watch and see what will happen this next year, but I think that there will be a major shift, because this is all connected to the rising cost of higher education, which has tripled for public universities and doubled for private four-year universities. And we are now all going through a global experiment where we all have had to adopt fully online methods at the same time, and we're going through this experiment together. So there's never been a time in our history in higher education where we have done this. So as we move forward, in the future and how we handle this, we'll start to wrap up my keynote by offering you some suggestions. First is to systematically integrate experience and connections into academics. That is key for any university to move forward. To build scalable digital structures and content, that what we offer to students has to be scalable and they can access it 24/7. That we teach life design and work skills to prepare them for the work of the future, that we measure impact over input, and we redefine the narrative of the purpose of higher education today. I will just touch on student support services in particular, which have been traditionally in the past based on transactional services, counseling, advising, and coaching. We provide some web resources. We provide some connections with alumni, with employers, with companies. And we provide some education and programming. And the mistake that some universities are already making is that they're just adding the word virtual to all of that, and they think that they have adapted. This is an opportunity for us to reinvent and reimagine how we do our work also. So my recommendation to any type of student support organization is to rethink their paradigm and their work to touch on three things: building content that is accessible to all, building community that where students can explore and design their educational experience in their life, not alone, but within a cohort, and to build connections with people who can open doors for them, and to integrate all of this into the full academic experience so that it is not a scavenger hunt for a student, that it is part of their academic journey and they can easily find it. And these are just some suggestions for colleagues, but certainly I think it deserves a retreat or a meeting for any group to think about how they can turn their organization into a content organization, a community organization, a connection organization, rather than transactional services organization. I would say that this is the only way to go, because we have seen our universities transition from academic and skill development to these massive ecosystems that connect all of our community members around the ideas of knowledge, skill, and connections. But what is important more today than ever before is that we have to make sure that all of what we have within our ecosystem is accessible to all students in an equitable way, and that access without social mobility is a false promise to students. That the fact that we just provide access to students of underrepresented backgrounds, students of color, first generation, limited income, isn't enough. We want to make sure that as they leave with equitable access to outcomes for their peers. This was a subject of my entire study that I did to track the shifts in higher education and how we have moved over the years. And what I think the next era is going to be about social mobility, that is our purpose. When I talk to my teams at Johns Hopkins, I tell them that we are not a student support organization. We are a social mobility organization. Yes, we do integrative learning, we do life design, but at the core, we are here to ensure that there is no gap between the haves and have-nots, that they all have the same shot at success, because ultimately those are the true outcomes of higher education. It's not just about skills and knowledge. I think we can tell with confidence that our universities have the structures to ensure that the majority or perhaps all students have access to skills and knowledge. But beyond that, it's about them getting connections and gaining confidence in their own ability to succeed in the future, to have great first destinations after they graduate, that they have access to social mobility, and ultimately to be fulfilled. And at the moment, as you go up this pyramid, unfortunately, we start to lose people all the way to the end, when it's only the few who tend to be privileged, and who have access to their own networks and who have learned how to work the system from a young age, who can do it. So our aim moving forward is to offer all of these outcomes to 100% of our students, which requires a complete rewiring of the systems that we have now. Otherwise, we end up with systematic oppression within our organizations. So I bring it back to the student to say that to any student who is interested in designing their life successfully, what they should do is to seek inspiration and make an audacious move. And to make an audacious move, they have to start to get curious, to get inspired, and to connect with mentors and with communities that can help support them as they take these risks and take advantage of all of the resources that are available to them. All of this is available to you in an article that I put out on LinkedIn, 5 Future Directions in University Career Services. And I also have a TEDx titled Life Purpose Reconsidered that you're welcome to look at. And I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes out there by Joseph Campbell. If the path before you is clear, you're probably on someone else's. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you, and I'm looking forward to hopefully what will be a thought-provoking conversation with your Chancellor, Dr. Michelle Marks. And thank you again, Michelle, for the invitation and for including me in your conversation today.
Well, it's so wonderful to have you here. You deserve a huge round of applause. Fascinating. I want to thank Larry Captain. Really, he was the one who offered the invitation after he saw you speak at our P3 conference, which was equally as fascinating. You're truly an innovator in this space. And there are a number of questions that are coming in from faculty and staff, and so I want to get to them. I'm going to ask one question before that, which is, you are a native of Algeria, and I am curious as to how your own personal story has informed your passion and your interest and your commitments to making a difference in this space.
Well, thank you for first looking that up and for starting there. I graduated high school during difficult times in Algeria. We were going through quite a bit of turmoil. This was in the 1990s. Gives up my age a little bit, and we were going through a civil war, and I had started attending college there. And I think by the second year, it was pretty obvious that if I were to continue education, it wasn't going to be in that country, just because we were going through lots of shutdowns. There was quite a bit of there was a great amount of death, unfortunately, around us. It was dangerous to leave the house and go to university on any day. Like, you're risking your life every day you do that. So eventually, I just decided that I wanted to do this, and I set my sights on Europe, actually, because it was closer. Because of also the French language, I was looking at France, where Algeria is a francophone country, so I speak both Arabic and French. And I didn't speak English at the time at all, but I was always fascinated with American culture. And it's your standard story of the fascination was all through media and Hollywood, and which was all debunked when I finally came here. And I sent one application out. There was an opportunity for some funding to go to a university for a year, and it ended up being the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And it worked. Like, this was sort of my audacious move. I tried it out, and somehow they responded. And it was during the time where you have to stuff big envelopes with lots of paperwork, and I had to go to the library many times to translate and get a lot of work done. And it worked. And long story short, a couple of years later, after a lot of paperwork and trying to get a visa, etc., I came to the United States as an international student to pursue education. What I could tell you to wrap this answer up is that I never came to the United States for education for knowing what I wanted to do, and nor did I really care. I just wanted the educational experience. I wanted to learn. I picked business because people told me I was good with numbers, so I just did that. But that was not necessarily my thing. But what got me into higher education is that I was extremely involved in the university, and I did just about everything as a student, from student government to an RA, and just loved the university experience. I worked my tail off in side jobs, and raised $3,000 by the end of the year. And I called a stockbroker and told him put all of it on Microsoft, and then I forgot about it. And then 2 years later, when I needed to pay tuition for my final year, I called the stockbroker and I said, "How much do I have there?" And he said, "You have 9,000." So so I pulled that, and that was enough to pay my final tuition bill. So that was my quick story, and then eventually it was just opportunity after another. But it has been life design before I knew what life design was. I never planned. It was just following opportunities and following curiosity and connecting with a lot of people who helped along the way.
That's awesome. Really, truly awesome. Well, it's been noted by a few folks that your background is completely appropriate for the College of Arts and Media here at CU Denver, in that you're zooming to us from the Peabody Conservatory Music Library, which is very, very beautiful.
Right.
I'm going to pose a couple of questions that were shared. I'm going to combine two questions shared by Lori Baevsky, the CAM Associate Dean of Research and Strategic Partnerships, and also by Amy Foss, Academic and Career Advisor in CAM. And the question is, what do you see as the role of self-identified creatives being at this moment, and the creatives in visual and performing arts? And what steps can this group and the faculty and staff in the College of Arts and Media take to begin to start to truly integrate the concept of life design that you speak about into our daily interactions with students?
I think embracing digital in anything that we do moving forward will be the key for anyone to design their life in the direction that the economy and society is headed. So whether that is digital media, digital arts, and frankly, I think what the current struggles are a little bit is in the performing arts, is finding a way to embrace this moment that we're in and deliver performing arts this way. And I know that this has been a challenge because I serve on the think tank right now for our Peabody Conservatory at Johns Hopkins. I was flattered when our dean asked me to be on it. So this is what we're tackling now as an issue: is how do orchestras perform in the future, and how do musicians perform? And some are finding their way, and we have already seen some examples of that. But most are really struggling because there is so we want to get back on stage, and we want to fill the room, and we want people, and we want the applause. And how does that look in a two-dimensional world with Hollywood squares all the time? What one of our faculty pointed out is that he is, with full recognition that it is really hard for performing arts, he is now teaching and supporting and also performing for more people than ever before from all over the world as a result of this, that he was able to somehow create the channel and the opportunities and to broadcast in a different way. So there is also kind of like a silver lining here, where perhaps the paradigm shifts that are happening just around us are allowing for more access to things like performing arts to people who would have never had them before. And I think that that's probably the blessing in disguise here. But as we move forward and as we advise students who are in these fields, I think we can't dodge the question of the role of digital and online as they design their lives further. And what that calls for is new skills that have to be included in their curriculum, and that they have to seek out on their own too, in order to because as we move forward, I think the startups that we don't know about yet that will be created are going to need the skills of these people to deliver that.
Thank you. Professor in our film and television, Eric Jewett, asked the following question: what does value measured by outcomes rather than input mean?
Yeah. We have had the habit, perhaps, and in higher education, and I'm painting a very broad stroke here. I know there are all sorts of exceptions, of assessing our impact by how many people, by numbers of people who show up. You know, whether it's enrollment numbers or people who show up at programs or people who show up at advising. I mean, you just go to any type of support system and it's a service, and I think typically in their annual report, they tell you how many people are showing up. Those are what I would call input data. They don't tell us what the outcome was. I think now, because there's pressure for universities to show value, and for the first time, students are really making choices, different types of choices on where they're going to enroll and where they're going, whether they're going to take a year off, etc. We have to show value on the outcome side, and that was, I think, a question that perhaps we might have dodged for a while, and we're having to come to grips with it. Is what is the outcome as a result of attending my program or taking my classes or attending my institution, in terms of your own fulfillment and in terms of your first destination and in terms of just how your life is, how you continue to design your life and the people that you're connecting with, and tie those directly with current learning outcomes, but also with the interventions of today. And so that's what I mean, is that there is input data, but I think we are going to be called to be accountable more for output data on the back end.
There are a number of questions relating to social mobility, so I'm going to share a few of them and then just ask you to speak about how you're thinking more about social mobility. One of them from Young Wang, our history professor, the question is, how does social mobility relate to upward mobility? Is the suggestion that the post-war notion of upward mobility is no longer tenable, or that the tools are no longer tenable? And I'll also add to that your work with Christine Cruz Vergara, by the way, one of my former wonderful colleagues, you recently adjusted your continuum of career services to include social mobility. So could you speak a little more to the way that you're thinking about social mobility in this space?
So the way we are tackling it at Johns Hopkins is by studying the gaps between students who come from non-privileged backgrounds and their peers. So we are in constant comparison of outcomes between first generation students and non-first generation students, those who come from limited income backgrounds versus not, white and Asian versus Black and brown students, women and men, particularly in the science and technology fields. And we're looking at a variety of metrics. First is the immersive experiences that they get to engage in while at school, the mentoring opportunities that they've had. We also look at how long it takes them to find their first opportunity after they graduate, where they land 5 years later. And we also look at income as one of the metrics at salary. And in our first look this last year, I have found gaps, and some of them are massive gaps, in every one of these categories, every single one. Yet before we made this study, our aggregate data showed a very beautiful story of Johns Hopkins, that only 3% of our students were still seeking opportunities, for example, after graduation. You know, that we have sort of like a 97% success rate or a first destination rate. That so there is hidden inequality there, and that's what those are the metrics that we are using to define social mobility for us. Is that we're looking at people who come from underprivileged backgrounds. They have access to this education. Where do they land after they graduate? Are they only getting jobs, or it's sort of like the path of least resistance? do they really have an opportunity to take the risks that their counterparts are taking, and to take on some of the great opportunities, to move out of state, to go out of the country, to start the startups, to do all of these things. And for the most part, we're finding is that many of them have lots of restrictions, lots of challenges back at home that keep them from even thinking about that.
Yeah, we see that too. Well, let me shift gears. The example that you gave at the very beginning of your talk was fascinating, and Associate Dean Mark Rabideau asked the following question: can you talk about the power of storytelling? She definitely learned how to tell her story as a tool for empowering students to invent the world that they hope to live in.
Mm-hmm. We are in the world of narratives, that everyone is able to create a personal narrative for themselves, and everyone is a content creator now, especially this year. All it takes is open up a Zoom channel and a Twitter account, and get some guests, and then just start talking. And and then the concept of social media influencers has very much been around us for a while. And I think that is actually one of the skills that the World Economic Forum pointed to, that they just added, is that the ability to manage your own brand, your own story, your own career. So we have to get better at teaching students how to do this. But also, I think what I've learned from experience is that the best way to learn it is to just do it, constantly, and to take small risks and steps as you go. I think in the process of life design, it is really important to not only identify one's curiosity and go and experiment and build those connections, but it's also important to identify what your story is about by reaching that point of clarity about what your personal vision is and your personal mission and what your values are. And that comes with time. And as we define that as people and as students define it, then their story starts to come together after that. And the way students are doing it this way, these days, is that you can see their story in their social media, in their YouTube channels, in their podcasts, in their websites. And it starts to come together that way. And I think for a long time, they've just kind of done it on their own, but we have to find a way to integrate it into the academic experience, because it will be very important moving forward.
Yes, I thought your comments about how jobs will be different and how universities will be different in the future and post-pandemic was absolutely fascinating. And Paul Connor, who's our Digital Animation Center instructor, asks a question about this in terms of what paradigm shift do you see happening when we transfer back to whatever environment we're transferring back into, but at least a somewhat more in-person environment. Will higher ed go back to some of the methodologies, or are we going to need to reinvent ourselves?
I think we have to reinvent ourselves, and the universities that will do this the right way, in my opinion, would be talking about fall 2021 now. I think a lot of universities are thinking about spring, about January, February, and how we're going to come back, and because we're still in the middle of the pandemic. But I think tasking a committee to look at fall 2021 and 22, and even just the future, would be the right thing to do. What I don't see us going back, but I also think it's too soon to fully adopt what we are doing now forever, because I think we all know that all of us, including our students, are craving the personal contact. Maybe when everybody's vaccinated, we're all gonna give each other just this global hug, that I think everybody's just really wanting to sit one's community right now. So that will come back. It's been hard to imagine how community is developed in the digital world. and I'm constantly exploring this part. But we've learned a lot during this pandemic that it would be a shame to just go back. To just go back and just drop everything that we're doing. So there are lots of for example, organizations that provide student support, if they fully buy into the concept of becoming content organizations rather than student services organizations, I don't think they can imagine themselves going fully back to the way they were, just needing offices and having a clinical setup where students come in for appointments, etc. I think they can continue to develop great content for their students and develop great connections and communities. And we're finding that students actually prefer doing that online. What students are missing is the in-person classroom and the student organizations and the campus experience. But a lot of the services, I think they can, for example, stay online.
Well, we've come to the end of our time, and I know that you have a student session to do next, so I will offer on behalf of CAM and CU Denver, offer incredible thanks and gratitude to you for sharing your knowledge and your ideas with us. Can we share a round of applause for Dr. Dey?
Oh, thank you.
And I'll kick it back to Dean Captain for last words.
Thank you.
Okay, I was so captivated by the questions and the presentation, I couldn't find my unmute button. But no, I want to thank, again, faculty and staff. Thanks for all you've done this semester. Thanks for showing our best of CAM today in your interactions with our guests. And Farouk, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us here. Chancellor Marks, I'm glad you had a chance not only to facilitate here, but to learn a little more about our faculty and staff from their interactions here. So many thanks again, everybody, okay? Be careful out there. Stay safe.